Daniel Carter heard the strange sound coming from Cargo Bay 7, and he stopped walking to listen more carefully. The sound was soft and high, almost like a bird crying. But there were no birds on Horizon 7 research station. I had been working as an environmental engineer on this deep space station for 3 years. Now and he knew every noise the old station made. But this was something new, and it worried. Hemi walked toward the cargo bay with his toolkit hanging from his belt and his boots making quiet sounds on the metal floor. The station orbited a volcanic moon called Peerless 4, and the red glow from the moon filled the windows with strange light. Daniel opened the cargo bay door and stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim emergency lighting. The room was filled with supply crates and broken equipment waiting for repair. And the crying sound was coming from behind a stack of old containers. He moved carefully around the crates, and then he saw them too. Small creatures huddled together in a torn blanket, their scales dull and their eyes wide with fear. They were dragons, baby dragons no bigger than house cats. And they were shaking from cold and hunger. Daniel had never seen Paraxian dragons before except in pictures. But he recognized them immediately from their distinctive twin horns and their long tails. Knelt down slowly so he would not scare them, and he spoke in a gentle voice. "Hey there, little ones," he said softly. "Where did you come from?" The dragons pressed closer together, and one of them let out another crying chirp that broke Daniel's heart. He remembered the report from 3 days ago about a transport ship that was attacked by pirates near this sector. And he remembered that the ship had been carrying protected wildlife to a sanctuary. Mother Dragon must have been on that ship. These babies were orphans now. Alone and afraid in a cold cargo bay, Daniel reached out his hand slowly, and the dragons sniffed his fingers with their tiny snouts. One of them, slightly smaller than the other with reddish scales, suddenly climbed onto his palm and pressed against his warm skin. The second one followed immediately, its scales more gray like ash, and both hatchlings crawled up his arm and tucked themselves. Inside his work coat, Daniel felt their small bodies trembling against his chest, and something in his heart changed forever in that moment. He stood up carefully and walked to the communication panel on the wall. "Carter to Commander Walsh," he said into the speaker. The commander's voice came back rough and tired. "What is it, Carter?" "Sir, I found something in Cargo Bay 7 that you need to see." 20 minutes later, Daniel stood in the commander's office with the 2 hatchlings still hidden inside his co-commander. Kevin Walsh was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes, and he looked at the dragons with a frown on his face. "They need to go to the xenobiology department," Walsh said firmly. "Dr. Mitchell can take care of them there." Daniel shook his head and held his coat closer. "Sir, with respect, I do not think that is a good idea. These are wild creatures. Carter, not pets. They are babies, sir. And they have already bonded to me." Dr. Laura Mitchell arrived a few minutes later. A tall woman with kind eyes and curly brown hair that she kept tied back. She examined the hatchlings gently while they stayed pressed against Daniel's chest, refusing to let go of his coat. "Commander, these are Paraxian dragons," she said with wonder in her voice. "They are extremely rare and extremely vulnerable at this age. Can you care for them in your lab?" Walsh asked. Dr. Mitchell shook her head slowly. "I am afraid not, sir, and here is why." She pulled up information on her datapad and showed it to both men. Paraxian hatchlings require constant physical contact with a bonded guardian for the first 6 months of their lives, she explained. Without that contact, they will refuse to eat, and they will die within weeks. Walsh rubbed his forehead with frustration. "And they have bonded to Carter?" "It appears so," Dr. Mitchell said with a small smile. "They imprinted on him when he found them." The commander looked at Daniel with a hard stare. "You understand what this means, right? You cannot just abandon your duties to babysit dragons." "I know, sir," Daniel replied. "I will find a way to do both. Walsh sighed heavily and waved his hand in dismissal. Fine, but if your work suffers, those creatures go to the first sanctuary we can find. Daniel nodded and left the office with the hatchlings. Still warm against his chest, he walked back to his quarters and sat down on his small bed. Then he opened his coat and looked at the two tiny dragons looking back at him. I guess you need names, he said softly. The reddish one chirped and bumped its head against his hand. You are warm like fire, Daniel said with a smile. I will call you Ember. The gray one made a quieter sound and curled its tail around Daniel's finger. And you are the color of ashes, he continued. So you will be Ash. Ember and Ash seemed to approve of their names because they both made happy sounds and pressed closer to Daniel's warmth. He spent the next hour feeding them protein paste from the emergency rations and giving them water. From a small cup they ate eagerly, and their scales already seemed a little brighter. Daniel looked at the maintenance schedule on his datapad, and he felt worried about how he would manage everything. But when Ember tugged at his coat with tiny claws, and Ash made a sound like purring, Daniel knew he would find a way. These small creatures needed him, and he would not let them down. Station's communication system suddenly crackled with an urgent message. Attention all personnel. This is Commander Walsh with an emergency announcement. Daniel stood up quickly and listened with the hatchlings chirping nervously inside his coat. We have received intelligence that the pirate fleet responsible for the attack on the transport vessel 3 days ago is heading toward our position. Daniel felt his blood turn cold. They are searching for something valuable that was left behind in our cargo bay. Walsh continued. All personnel prepare for possible evacuation. Walsh out. Daniel looked down at Ember and Ash, and he understood with terrible clarity what the pirates were hunting. They were coming for these babies. They were coming for his dragons. The next morning, Daniel woke up with two warm bodies pressed against his neck and tiny claws tangled in his hair. Ember was snoring softly, and Ash had wrapped its long tail around Daniel's arm like a living bracelet. He smiled despite the fear that had kept him awake most of the night, and he gently untangled himself from the sleeping dragons. Come on, little ones, he whispered. I have work to do, and you are coming with me. The hatchlings made unhappy sounds when he moved them, but they quickly climbed back onto his chest and settled inside his coat. Daniel had spent part of the night modifying his tool harness, adding soft padding and secure straps that would hold both dragons safely against his body while he worked. It was not elegant, but it would keep them close and keep his hands free. He walked through the station corridors toward the main engineering bay, and he noticed other crew members staring at him. Some of them whispered to each other, and a few of them smiled, but most of them looked confused or annoyed. Chief Engineer Marcus Hayes was waiting for him at the entrance to the engineering bay with his arms crossed and his face showing clear disapproval. Carter, what in the name of the stars are you doing? Hayes demanded. Doing my job, sir, Daniel replied calmly. With animals strapped to your chest? They are not just animals, sir. They are Pyrexian dragons, and they will die if I leave them alone. Hayes threw his hands up in frustration. This is a research station, not a nursery. I understand, sir. But Dr. Mitchell said they need constant contact with me for 6 months. 6 months, Hayes shouted. And Ember lifted her head and hissed at him. Daniel patted the hatchling gently, and she calmed down. Sir, I promise my work will not suffer. Hayes glared at him for a long moment and then pointed toward the far end of the bay. The thermal regulator on deck 12 is malfunctioning again, and nobody else wants to crawl through those vents to fix it. I will handle it. Sir, Daniel spent the next 4 hours working in tight maintenance corridors and crawling through ventilation shafts with Ember and Ash tucked safely against his chest. The hatchlings were surprisingly well behaved. and they seemed to understand that Daniel needed to concentrate when he reached difficult spots. They would press themselves flat against his body and stay completely still when he finished each repair. They would chirp happily and nuzzle his chin by midday. Daniel had completed all his assigned tasks and even fixed 2 additional problems. He had noticed along the way he emerged from a maintenance hatch covered in grease and dust. But the dragons were clean, and Content Chief Hayes was reviewing the work logs on his datapad, and he looked up at Daniel with surprise on his face. "You finished everything?" he asked with disbelief. "Yes, sir. And I also fixed the flickering lights on Deck 9 and the squeaky door on Storage Room 3. Hayes stared at him for a long moment, and then he shook his head slowly. "I do not know how you did it, Carter. I had good helpers," Daniel said with a smile. And Amber poked her head out of his coat and chirped at the chief engineer. Hayes almost smiled, but he caught himself and turned back to his datapad. "Just keep up the good work." Daniel walked to the cafeteria to get some food, and he found Dr. Mitchell waiting for him at a corner table. She had a worried expression on her face that made his stomach tighten with concern. "What is wrong?" he asked as he sat down across from her. "I have been researching Paraxian dragons," she said quietly, "and I found something disturbing." She showed him her datapad, and Daniel read the information with growing horror. "Their scales contain Paraxium?" he whispered. "Yes, a rare element worth billions of credits on the black market." Daniel looked down at Ember and Ash sleeping peacefully in his coat. "That is why the pirates are coming." Dr. Mitchell nodded sadly. "They do not want to capture the dragons alive, Daniel. They want to harvest them for their scales." Daniel felt anger rising in his chest like a fire. "I will not let that happen. The commander has ordered evacuation preparations." "But there is a problem." "What problem?" "The only ship large enough to carry the entire crew has a damaged engine, and no one can fix it in time." Daniel thought about this for a moment, and then he stood up from the table. "Show me the ship." They walked together to the main docking bay where a large transport vessel called this Wanderer sat waiting. The ship was old but sturdy, and Daniel could see the damaged engine section from across the bay. He spent an hour examining the problem while Dr. Mitchell held the hatchlings. Although they chirped constantly and kept trying to climb back to Daniel, "I can fix this," he said finally. "But it will take at least 12 hours of continuous work. The pirates will be here in 18 hours, according to our last report. Then I'd better get started." Daniel worked through the afternoon and into the evening, only stopping to feed the hatchlings and drink water. Ember and Ash stayed with him the whole time, sometimes sleeping and sometimes watching him work with curious eyes as midnight approached. Daniel was deep inside the engine compartment when Ember suddenly started chirping loudly. The sound was different from her usual noises. More urgent and frightened. Ash joined in a moment later, both hatchlings pressing themselves against Daniel's chest and trembling. "What is it, little ones?" Daniel asked softly. He listened carefully, but he could not hear anything unusual. The station was quiet and the engines were silent, but the dragons kept chirping and their small bodies shook with fear. Daniel trusted their instincts more than his own senses, and he slowly climbed out of the engine compartment. He activated his communicator and called the command center. "Carter to bridge. Is everything okay up there?" There was a long pause before Commander Walsh responded. "We just picked up a new sensor reading, Carter," the commander said with tension in his voice. "What kind of reading, sir?" Another pause. "Longer this time. The pirates are here," Walsh said grimly. "They arrived 6 hours earlier than expected." Daniel looked down at Ember and Ash, and he saw the fear in their tiny eyes. They had known somehow. They had sensed the danger coming before any of the station's advanced sensors could detect it. "What do we do now, sir?" Daniel asked. The commander's voice was heavy with exhaustion and worry. "Pray that you can fix that engine faster than you thought, Carter, because they are already requesting permission to dock." Daniel started climbing back into the engine compartment with renewed urgency. The hatchlings pressed themselves flat against his chest and stayed completely silent. They understood that the real danger was only beginning. The pirate ship connected to the station's docking port with a loud metallic clang that echoed through the corridors. Daniel was still working on the Wanderer's engine when he heard the announcement over the station's speakers. "Attention all personnel." Commander Walsh's voice was tight with controlled anger. "We have visitors requesting entry. All non-essential crew report to your quarters and remain there until further notice." Daniel knew that visitors meant the pirates had demanded entry, and the commander had no way to refuse them. The station had minimal weapons and a small security team of only 8 people fighting was not an option. He continued working on the engine while listening to the communications chatter through his earpiece. The pirate captain was called Thrall, and he was a Vexery, a species known for their cunning and their complete lack of mercy. Thrall's voice came through the communication channel, cold and sharp like a blade. "Commander Walsh, I appreciate your hospitality. You gave us little choice." "Captain Thrall," Walsh replied stiffly, "I am a reasonable being, Commander. I am only here to collect what belongs to me. Nothing on this station belongs to you." Thrall laughed, and the sound made Daniel's skin crawl. 3 days ago, my associates raided a transport ship carrying valuable cargo to a sanctuary. You mean you murdered innocent people and stole protected wildlife? Such harsh words. Commander, I prefer to think of it as aggressive commerce. Daniel heard Walsh take a deep breath before responding. The Galactic Protection Protocols forbid the trade or harvest of Paraxian dragons. The Galactic Protection Protocols mean nothing to me, Thrall said with amusement. Now give me the hatchlings and I will leave peacefully. I cannot do that. There was a long pause, and then Thrall spoke again, his voice no longer amused. Then we will take them by force. The communication cut off, and Daniel heard the alarms begin to wail throughout the station. He looked down at Ember and Ash, who were trembling against his chest, their eyes wide with terror. I will not let them take you, he whispered. I promise. He grabbed his datapad and quickly connected it to the station's internal network. Then he climbed out of the engine compartment and started running the corridors. Were chaos as crew members hurried to their quarters and security officers moved toward the docking bay. Daniel ducked into a maintenance corridor and found a ventilation access hatch. We're going to hide for a while, he told the hatchlings as he climbed into the vent. You need to be very quiet. Ember and Ash pressed themselves flat against his chest and did not make a sound. Daniel crawled through the ventilation system, using his knowledge of the station's layout to avoid the main corridors, where the pirates were searching through the vent grates. He could see Thrall's crew moving through the station in groups of 3, their weapons ready and their faces eager for violence. The Vexery were tall and thin with pale blue skin and black eyes that showed no emotion. They searched every room and questioned every crew member. They found Daniel heard screaming from somewhere below him, and he forced himself to keep moving. He found a junction point where several vents met, and he settled there with the hatchlings, pulling out his datapad to monitor the situation. The pirates had brought 30 soldiers onto the station, and they were systematically searching every level. Security officer Nathan Brooks was coordinating the defense from the command center, but there was little he could do against such overwhelming numbers. All security teams fall back to defensive positions. Brooks ordered through the communication channel, do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Daniel watched through a vent grate as a group of pirates passed below him. One of them stopped and sniffed the air, his thin nostrils flaring. I smell something, the pirate said to his companions. Something alive and valuable. Daniel held his breath and pressed himself against the wall of the vent. Ember started to make a small sound, but Daniel covered her snout gently with his hand. The pirate looked up toward the ceiling, and Daniel felt his heart stop. But then another pirate called out from down the corridor. "Captain Frau wants us in the cargo bay. Move it." The sniffing pirate hesitated for a moment longer and then followed his companions away. Daniel let out a slow breath and felt sweat running down his face. He needed a plan. He could not hide in the vents forever. And the Wanderer's engine was still not fixed if the evacuation ship could not fly. Everyone on the station would be trapped with the pirates. Daniel opened the schematic of the station on his datapad and studied it carefully. There had to be something he could use, some way to fight back without weapons. His eyes fell on the emergency systems panel, and an idea began to form. In his mind, the station had emergency venting protocols designed to expel atmosphere in case of contamination. If he could isolate certain sections and trigger the venting system selectively, he could trap the pirates in specific areas, but someone would need to stay behind to trigger the sequence manually. The system required authorization from a physical terminal, not a remote command. Daniel looked down at Ember and Ash, and he felt his heart breaking. He could not take them with him if he was going to do this, but he could not leave them alone either. Through the vents, he heard Thrall's voice echoing from the main corridor. "Human engineers are clever creatures," the pirate captain was saying, "but they are also predictable. Search the ventilation systems." Daniel started moving immediately, crawling as fast as he could through the narrow passages. He needed to find Dr. Mitchell. She was the only person he trusted to protect the hatchlings if something happened to him. He found her in the medical bay, hiding behind an overturned examination table with two other crew members. Daniel dropped down from the vent, and she nearly screamed before recognizing him. "Daniel, thank the stars you were safe," she whispered. He handed her the two hatchlings, and Ember immediately started chirping in distress. "Take care of them," Daniel said. "I have a plan, but I need to stay behind to make it work." "What are you going to do?" "I am going to trap the pirates and give everyone time to escape." Dr. Mitchell grabbed his arm. "That is suicide, Daniel. Maybe. But those babies deserve a chance to live." He looked at Ember and Ash one more time, and he saw tears forming in their tiny eyes. They understood that he was leaving them. "I will come back if I can," he said softly. "But if I do not, please make sure they find a good home." He turned and climbed back into the vent before Dr. Mitchell could argue behind him. He heard Ember and Ash crying, and the sound tore at his heart. But he kept moving forward because that was what humans did. They protected the ones they loved. No matter the cost, he crawled toward the central engineering hub where the emergency controls were located. The pirates were hunting for him now, their footsteps echoing through the corridors below. Daniel was alone and outgunned and terrified, but he was also determined, and sometimes determination was stronger than any weapon. Daniel reached the central engineering hub and dropped down from the ventilation shaft into the empty room. The emergency control panel was on the far wall, its screens glowing with status updates and warning messages. Ran to the panel and started programming the venting sequence, his fingers moving quickly across the controls. The plan was simple, but dangerous. He would seal the pirates in specific sections of the station and then vent the atmosphere from those sections. It would not kill them because their suits had emergency oxygen supplies, but it would disable them long enough for everyone else to escape. The problem was that someone needed to override the safety protocols from this terminal. The system was designed to prevent accidental venting, and it required a person to confirm each step. Manually, Daniel was halfway through the programming when he heard footsteps. Behind him, he turned around and found himself facing Captain Thrall and 6 of his soldiers. The Fod soldiers, the Thrall and 6 of his soldiers, the Fail and 6 of his soldiers. Vexery Captain was taller than Daniel had expected. Nearly 7 feet of pale blue skin and coal black eyes. He wore a dark uniform decorated with trophies from his kills, including what looked like dragon scales sewn into his collar. The clever engineer, Thrall said with a thin smile. I have been looking for you. Daniel stepped back against the control panel. I do not have what you want, but you know where the hatchlings are hidden. I will never tell you. Thrall laughed softly and gestured to his soldiers. Humans are fascinating creatures, so brave and so foolish at the same time. Two soldiers grabbed Daniel's arms and pulled him away from the control panel. He struggled, but they were too strong. Thrall walked closer and studied Daniel's face with curiosity. Why do you care so much about two small dragons? They are not even your species. They are innocent, Daniel said through gritted teeth. They deserve to live. They are worth billions of credits, Thrall replied. Their scales contain paraxium, the rarest element in the galaxy. So you would murder children for money? Thrall's smile disappeared. I would do anything for enough money. He turned to his soldiers. Search the station again. Find the hatchlings. Kill anyone who resists. Wait, Daniel said quickly. I will tell you where they are. The soldiers stopped and Thrall turned back to face him. I am listening. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to stall. They are in the medical bay, but if you hurt them, they will be worthless. Thrall tilted his head with suspicion. Explain. Paraxian dragons release toxins when they die, Daniel lied. The toxins contaminate their scales and destroy the paraxium. The captain studied him for a long moment. You are lying. Maybe, but can you afford to take that risk? Thrall considered this and then nodded slowly. Very well. You will come with us and retrieve the hatchlings yourself. This was what Daniel wanted. If he could get close to the hatchlings, he could protect them and find another way to trigger his plan. The soldiers marched him through the corridors toward the medical bay. Daniel kept his hands visible and his movements slow. But his mind was working on a new strategy. He still had his datapad hidden in his back pocket. If he could access it without the pirates noticing, he might be able to trigger some of the emergency protocols remotely. They turned a corner, and Daniel saw Dr. Mitchell standing in the middle of the corridor, with Ember and Ash cradled in her arms. Nathan Brooks was beside her with two other security officers, their weapons aimed at the pirates. Let him go, Brooks commanded. His voice steady. Thrall laughed and pulled a weapon from his belt, pressing it against Daniel's head. Lower your weapons or I will kill him. The security officers hesitated, but they did not lower their weapons. The dragons, Thrall said impatiently. Hand them over now. Dr. Mitchell held the hatchlings tighter, and Daniel could see them trembling with fear. Please, Daniel said quietly. Do not give them to him. Shut up, Thrall hissed, pressing the weapon harder against Daniel's skull. Daniel reached slowly behind his back and found his datapod. His fingers moved across the screen without looking. Entering commands from memory, he activated the emergency bulkhead system and set it to trigger in 10 seconds. Last chance, Thrall warned. Give me the dragons or watch this man die. The seconds ticked by in Daniel's mind. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The bulkhead slammed shut with a deafening crash, separating Thrall and Daniel from the other pirates. Only 3 soldiers remained on their side of the barrier. Cut off from reinforcements, Nathan Brooks moved immediately, firing at the nearest soldier, while the other security officers engaged the remaining. Thrall spun around in confusion, and Daniel used the moment to break free from his grip, threw himself at the pirate captain, and they crashed to the floor together. The weapon flew from Thrall's hand and skidded across the metal deck. They struggled on the ground. Thrall's superior strength against Daniel's desperate determination. A fist connected with Daniel's jaw, and he saw stars. Another blow struck his ribs, and he felt something crack, but he kept fighting because Ember and Ash were watching, and he had promised to protect them. Dr. Mitchell ran forward and kicked the weapon further away from Thrall's captain threw Daniel aside and lunged for the doctor. Reaching for the hatchlings with his long fingers, Daniel grabbed Thrall's ankle and pulled him down. They rolled across the floor, trading blows and gasping for breath. The gunfire around them faded as the security officers dealt with the remaining soldiers. Daniel managed to get on top of Thrall, and he pinned the captain's arms with his knees. "It is over," he said. Blood dripping from his split lip. Thrall smiled up at him. That cold, thin smile that held no warmth. "Nothing is over, human." He twisted suddenly, and Daniel felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. Thrall had pulled a hidden blade from his sleeve and stabbed him. Daniel fell backward, clutching his wounded shoulder as blood poured between his fingers. Thrall stood up slowly and picked up his fallen weapon. He aimed it at Daniel's head. "You fought well for a human. I will remember that." Daniel looked at Ember and Ash in Dr. Mitchell's arms. They were watching him with their tiny eyes full of tears. This was not how it was supposed to. And then the hatchlings did something no one expected. Their scales began to glow with an inner light, bright and fierce like living fire. Ember opened her small mouth, and flames poured out. The flames were small compared to what an adult dragon could produce, but they were hot enough to make Thrall jump backward and shock. Ember's first breath of fire was followed immediately by Ash, and together the twin hatchlings created a wall of flame between their human guardian and the pirate. Captain Dr. Mitchell nearly dropped them in surprise, but she held on tight. The fire only lasted a few seconds before the hatchlings exhausted themselves. But it was enough. Thrall's weapon hand was burned, and he dropped his pistol with a cry of pain. Daniel pushed through the agony in his shoulder and launched himself at the captain one more time. They collided hard, and Daniel drove his elbow into Thrall's throat. The pirate captain choked and stumbled backward, hitting the wall and sliding down to the floor. Nathan Brooks was there a moment later with restraints in his hands. "Stay down," the security officer ordered, pressing his weapon against Thrall's head. The captain glared at Daniel with pure hatred in his black eyes. "This is not over, human. It is for today," Daniel replied. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed. Dr. Mitchell was at his side immediately. The hatchlings still clutched against her chest. Ember and Ash were making distressed sounds and trying to climb toward Daniel. "Let them go," Daniel said weakly. Dr. Mitchell released them, and the twin dragons crawled onto Daniel's chest, pressing their warm bodies against his wounded shoulder. Their scales still glowed faintly with residual heat, and Daniel could feel that warmth spreading into his damaged flesh. "The bleeding is slowing," Dr. Mitchell said with amazement. "Their body heat is cauterizing the wound." Daniel smiled and rested his hand on the hatchlings. "Good job, little ones," Ember chirped softly and licked his cheek with her tiny tongue. Ash curled his tail around Daniel's arm and made a sound like purring. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The remaining pirates surrendered after learning that their captain had been captured and their ship had been disabled by the station security systems. Commander Walsh coordinated the cleanup, while Nathan Brooks secured the prisoners in the station's holding cells. Mitchell treated Daniel's wounds in the medical bay, with the hatchlings refusing to leave his side. The stab wound was serious, she told him as she worked, but the dragon's heat helped stop the bleeding. "You are very lucky." "I do not feel lucky," Daniel said with a weak laugh. "I feel like I got hit by a cargo shuttle. You almost died protecting those babies." "It was worth it." Dr. Mitchell finished bandaging his shoulder and sat back with a tired smile. "The commander wants to see you when you are ready." Daniel walked slowly to the command center with Ember and Ash tucked safely in his coat. Again, they had not stopped touching him since the fight ended. As if they were afraid he might disappear, Commander Walsh was waiting for him with a strange expression on his face, something between admiration and disbelief. "Carter, What you did today was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. Sir, Walsh allowed himself a small smile. The engine repairs you made before all this chaos, they worked perfectly. The Wanderer is fully operational. That is good news. Sir, I am recommending you for a galactic humanitarian citation for your actions today. Daniel felt his face flush with embarrassment. I was just doing what anyone would do. No. Carter, you did what very few people would do. You risked your life for creatures that were not even your own species. Daniel looked down at Ember and Ash, who were watching the conversation with curious eyes. They needed someone to protect them. I was just in the right place at the right time. Walsh nodded slowly. There is one more thing. He handed Daniel datapad with an official communication displayed on the Vidon screen. A Paraxian dragon. Sanctuary on the planet Verdantis has agreed to take the hatchlings when they are old enough to travel. Daniel felt his heart sink even though he knew this was the best outcome ever. And Ash deserved a proper home with their own kind. Not a life on a research station with a human engineer. When do they need to leave? He asked quietly. Walsh's expression softened. Read the rest of the message. Daniel looked at the screen, and his eyes widened. The sanctuary was not just offering to take the hatchlings. They were requesting that Daniel come with them as the dragon's permanent guardian. The imprint bond between Paraxian hatchlings and their guardians is sacred, the message read. Breaking that bond would cause irreparable psychological harm to the dragons. Therefore, we request that Daniel Carter of Horizon 7 Station accept a position as senior guardian at the Verdantis Dragon Sanctuary. Daniel read the message 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. They want me to go with them? They insist on it, actually, Walsh replied. Apparently, you are now officially a dragon father. Dr. Mitchell had entered the command center, and she was smiling at Daniel's shocked expression. I may have sent them a detailed report about your bond with the hatchlings, she admitted. They were very impressed. Daniel looked down at Ember and Ash, and both dragons chirped happily, as if they understood what was happening. What do you think, little ones? He asked them softly. Ember tugged at his coat with her tiny claws. Ash pressed his warm body against Daniel's chest. Their answer was clear 3 months later. Daniel stood in his new workshop at the Verdantis Dragon Sanctuary. The room was larger than his old quarters on Horizon 7, and it had a beautiful window overlooking the sanctuary's main habitat outside. He could see dozens of Paraxian dragons flying through the warm air, their scales glittering in the sunlight. Ember and Ash were much bigger now, nearly the size of medium dogs. But they still refused to let Daniel work without them. Nearby, Ember was curled around his toolbox, her tail twitching as she watched him repair a broken climate control unit. Ash was draped across Daniel's shoulders like a living scarf, occasionally nibbling on his ear to get attention. I am trying to concentrate, Daniel told them with a smile. Ember chirped and tugged at his coat. The same gesture she had made since the first day they met. Daniel stopped working and scooped up both dragons, holding them close against his chest. I love you too, he whispered outside the window. The sun was setting over the sanctuary, and the sky was painted with colors of orange and gold. Daniel sat down at his workstation with his dragons in his lap, and he felt complete peace. For the first time in his life, he had found his purpose in the stars. He had found his family, and whenever Ember and Ash tugged at his coat, asking for his attention, he held them close and kept working, because that was what fathers did. They protected their children, and they never let go.